Good afternoon. This meeting of the Preservation Board is now in order. I'm going to call the roll.
Oh, wow.
Commissioner Richardson, are you here?
Here.
Commissioner Kennedy, are you here?
Here.
Thank you, Alderman. Commissioner Vines, are you here?
Here.
Did I miss anybody? Okay. Commissioners, has anybody read the minutes from the last meeting?
I move that we approve these minutes.
Is there a
Second.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, those are our minutes. Commissioners, take a look at the agenda. Do you propose any changes in the order or any additions of new business? Is anybody going to need to recuse themselves on any of these agenda items? Okay, then without any appearing any objection, this will be our agenda, and we will begin 12:15 to 12:17 Dolman. And for the record, Commissioner Robinson has entered, which means Commissioner Richardson hurried in for no good reason.
I'm Jan Cameron from the Culture Resources Office. This is a preliminary review application to construct 2 semi-detached townhouses on Dolman Street in the Lafayette Square Historic District. This is the site. I'll point out to you that it is somewhat less usual than others because it has very wide side yards. The adjacent properties have wide side yards. You can see here, so keep in mind that the secondary elevations on each unit will be exposed to street view. Here's a site plan, and you can see that there's about 24 feet between the new building and the building to the left, and maybe 30-some feet between building right. This is the proposed model example. I will say at this point that the neighborhood has requested that anyone constructing new buildings in the neighborhood select different model examples, and so that we don't have the same model being repeated over and over again. I will note that that is not actually specifically spelled out in the Historic District standards, that simply require a model example existing in the district. But this is the one that's been chosen for this. The developer has agreed to select a model that hasn't been used previously. And this is his proposed front elevation. Now, you will see in comparison of the two that the historic building is more elaborate. It has some more stone details that are not going to be replicated. It has double doors, but generally it follows the concept of the historic model example. And the staff is recommending that it be acceptable as proposed. The neighborhood would like to see some additional changes. I'll get to that in a second. This is a street elevation. There's the wide side yards that I spoke of earlier. And those are the buildings that are adjacent to either side. This is the north elevation and the south elevation. And I will say that the developer has changed some of the fenestration on these sides to bring it more in compatibility with historic examples. And the rear, which is also brick. Frame 4-car garage back. And very quickly, this is the site looking to the southwest. And the context south of the site. And then looking north. So Dolman Street is beginning to fill up. This is the context opposite. Right, I have a letter from the president and the co-vice president of the LSRC Development Committee. They specify several conditions they would like to see applied to the design. That there would be more cast stone segments with ornate elements to bring it closer to the historic model example. Turn my lights off.
Oh, lights.
The first floor windows should project outwards. The brick masonry around those windows does project slightly in the historic building. It does not in the proposed building. If dormer doors are cost prohibitive, they would like to see double doors. What I had discussed previously with the developer is the possibility of doing a single door that was designed to look as though it were a double door. And that vertical mullion should be added, which I believe is represented in the drawings I just presented to you. Okay, I'll submit that, and otherwise the staff is recommending that the board grant preliminary approval, subject to staff review of final construction drawings and exterior materials.
Questions on this side, please, Cameron? Questions on this side? Yes.
Can we bring up the picture, Jan, of the first floor next to the model, or the front elevation and the model example?
Yeah. I'll get to it.
So, obviously, I haven't studied this at great length, but it just, a first glance at this, it looks like the first floor windows are significantly more squatty than what I'm seeing there on the model example.
There's another request from the neighborhood that it become, and I believe the developer has agreed to do that.
And then there's a big space between those windows on the second floor on the ends. We don't, down there.
Yeah, and this is a sandstone detail. It's quite deteriorated, so it's difficult to see what it originally looked like, but yeah.
But
And
it just-
also, this is what the letter referred to as this area around the windows does
Oh, a little
project out
projection.
slightly. Mhm.
It's the old drawing. Yeah, I'm just thinking about that's much smaller space than this.
Yes.
But these seem squattier. Do we have the same height as the model example, or did they make
Yeah.
it shorter? Oh, they did?
Mhm.
Oh, that should be. So I would suggest that we try to get closer.
Further questions? Thank you. Okay, let's hear from the applicant.
Oh. Do you need my name and address, or am I?
Just need you to step back a half step.
Okay, got it.
There you go.
So
Where you are.
my name's John Muller with Diversified Real Estate Group. So we have, on every project, worked very well with Lafayette Square, and they made a handful of comments about ways to improve the project based on a new model example. So we've worked hand in hand with Lafayette Square, and we've agreed to make all the changes per the request of Lafayette Square. There are a handful of changes that have actually already been made to the plan, such as making some of those first floor windows taller to keep the ratios in check, squeezing some closer together, making some further apart. We're okay with all the changes that Lafayette Square needs.
Questions on this side?
I'm sorry, so I'm looking at this letter that had 6 items, so are you saying you're doing all 6 of those on this letter from the LSRC dated October 21st?
Seen the letter, so maybe I should take a look.
You are?
We've talked about all of them.
Questions on this side? Okay, thank you very much. Suzanne Sessions?
I want to introduce our new vice chairman of the Lafayette Square Development Committee, and he's the one who prepared all of these pages that we put together for our rebuttal of the plan. And this is Phil Lomchek. And so he will be serving with me as vice chairman for this next year. And he's really good because he knows PowerPoint. Anyway, to be quick about it, we've had 2 meetings with John, and they've been very productive, and we explained our concern about going back and doing the same building facade again for the 3rd time on this street. And I've heard, and others have heard, a concern that cookie cutter and our square could stand to have some new looking designs. And so this is a chance to take, that duplex that they've got there and do something a little bit different, still within Lafayette Square, still within the commands of the neighborhood. We suggested this particular one. We found it. John agreed to it, and I'm happy that he did decide to do it. We wish that we could have had, stormer doors on it. It is prohibitive. I heard for him to be able, with his clients, to put the stormer doors. Any chance we get, we'd rather see that than the inner doors left alone, and even more so, single doors. And so we've talked to John about the possibility, in the case of these two, doing the dummy double doors, so that they still have a single swing, but they will have the molding in the center to appear as, a double door. And you could take them to be just architectural trim, or it will have just one handle. So that's maybe the best we can do on this. We tried. We really want.
How is the work on your new standards coming?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
How is the work on your new standards coming?
We just started. It's in progress. We're going to get a lot of help too on that.
That would be the easiest way of dealing with this historic model example issue.
Yeah, yes, we know that, but this came up before we could get into it. We're well aware of that. Thank you for that. We're well aware.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Killeen, have you got a motion?
Do not, my fellow commissioner might have one. Commissioner Richards.
Commissioner Richardson, have you got a motion?
I do, that the Preservation Board grant preliminary approval to the proposed new construction with the condition that the fenestration be revised to more closely replicate the historic model example, including but not limited to the 6 points that are on the Lafayette Square Restoration Committee's letter dated October 21st, 2017, and that final plans and materials be approved by the Cultural Resources Office.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Okay. Do agenda item B, 1817 LaSalle. Good job, commissioners. Questions for Jan? Commissioners have questions for the applicant?
I just had one, so, I'm sorry, maybe I missed it, but is this the Missouri Valley Conference lot? So are they still the owner and you're just under contract, or did you buy it from them?
Okay. Commissioner Richardson, have you got a motion?
I move that the Preservation Board grant preliminary approval to the proposed new construction with the stipulation that final plans and materials be approved by the Cultural Resources Office.
Second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Is there discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, Commissioners, we are going to reconvene as an authority to hear an appeal of a director's decision to establish who's here. Commissioners Robinson, Richardson, Killeen, Kennedy, Vines, and Callow have noted that they are present. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yep.
Okay. I will ask those who speak to the Preservation Board to tell us their name, address, and to agree that they're going to tell us the truth. So, calling 7200 to 7230 South Broadway.
South Broadway in the Carrot neighborhood. I swear it. This is the block building. In the foreground is 72. This is a block. Here is a slide showing the location of the project. Block. Isn't the actual. We're letting you now down the block, and identify. They are all one parcel. To the best of our ability to identify at what point they became one parcel. So this is South Broadway. First floor.
Wait, just to clarify, that actually isn't their proposal. That is an example for you to visualize.
Exactly. So that's,
So what was that? That looked like the plans of the old, what's there now, no?
It's a rendering once he wants to build there. What
Okay.
hypothetical?
the, so this picture is looking north, there's a big lot south. This is kind of diagonally across the street, south down the block. There are, that, is either new or more historic. Across the street from the block in question is the bank building. And it is occupied. Although it is working, so it's. This is back across the street from the 17th century. And finally, this is across the block, the north Broadway building. Inappropriate redesign. And then there's a building what I'd like to do is take you around the various blocks. Main areas of development are the condition of the building. We are now doing exchange of operations. It is one parcel, but it's two uses. And finally, I do have some exterior shots. They aren't, I do have to be identified as buildings. They're not buildings. All the blocks are express buildings. And this is an interior capture. Pass out. I have 3 copies of letter from Alderman Sarah Markey
She is in support of the demolition.
Yes. Well.
Did you
Where's
just go over
that?
and tell us the contract?
Uh,
One by one. That calls for the demolition. Under architectural policy, say, my use here, primary, this is so much. Judge, they are listed eastern side that must be very, I'd like to talk to Bill about one reason that the staff denied this demolition is to oppose it. Despite the good intentions, I find it when it says our proposal is complete demolition of the entire block, trying to preserve any or to be sidewalk side. Immediate the newly designed states that newly our goal and then they say our and sort of meantime, I feel think there are still opportunities some like just making one is however, I know there may be some new market allocations. I think for demolition. I did not see any kind of analysis that showed particular structural some of these buildings,
Yeah.
if not all of them, and before true demolition of these types of structures, a more careful analysis and 4 or 5% I think that's I do not feel like the there aren't options. So, in that this
So, just to clarify that last bit of testimony, it is 1 permit for all 7 buildings, not 7 permits, 7 buildings. Questions on this side? Questions on this side?
I'd just be, oh, I guess we can ask the applicant, the appellant.
Okay. Commissioner Nicholson?
Well, I guess I'd ask the question, so let's just, if you took them individually, let's just assume it was 7 applications. Are there any of the 7 buildings that would meet the criteria of the preservation review ordinance?
I would say part of a kind of analysis. We cannot, that they are not viable for redevelopment. You know, the overall project,
So I just want to go through the 8 criteria just for my own benefit here again, and just stop me. I think of it as building by building. So none of the 7 buildings have a redevelopment plan, correct? And that's the most important criteria per the ordinance, correct? And Alderwoman Martin, if she wanted to, could have done a redevelopment plan if they actually had a finite proposal here, correct? Okay. And the architectural quality, so all 7 are merit? Okay, and the little joiners then, they wouldn't be non-contributing though, right? They'd be qualifying or something, right? Okay, so then, and you didn't give me any unusual circumstances that would justify demolition of any of the 7? Okay, and then as far as the condition, are all 7 individually sound? Under the ordinance? Okay. And the neighborhood effect and reuse potential, would, you testified, I think, well, you said, it's all, development's all local, and hasn't was it Ben Sims do a bunch of rehab down there? Hasn't there been a bunch of rehab work done on Broadway? And, okay. And so, is there any evidence that says that any of these 7 would not be potentially rehabable? Okay. Okay. Who was the tax credit consultant? Okay. On urban design, you said it would have a catastrophic effect, I think. Is that true of all 7? Okay. But if you lost one in the middle, you'd have a missing tooth. That would probably have a negative effect as well?
that would have a negative.
Sure. Okay. And then the proposed new construction, so there isn't anything specific that would show that would equal or exceed what's there today, correct?
Well, let me say, the evidence I have from the developer, they're here, there may be additional material that doesn't reflect that. Assuming you have will equal.
So the evidence that you have thus far in applying those criteria, it looks like there's 6 that would support not demolishing, 1 that's not applicable because that was commonly controlled property. That one you had NA, right? Because again, they're not going to expand an existing business or anything. Okay. And then accessory structures would be the only one that maybe you'd allow them to, or they could. Right. Okay. So applying those criteria, even in the weighted fashion, it's overwhelmingly the answer would be that we should oppose demolition.
Based on
Thank you.
Dan, I've got a question for you. Can you clarify why this parcel was rendered a single parcel as opposed to individual parcels?
Well, we tried to consolidate. As I looked at the project, I just kept coming back to that. We know that we found evidence that in the 20s they were not and we haven't found that there was a reference, I call that overall, but there was a reference to a real estate document that we thought would tell us when it was, but that turned out to be a mistake and had nothing to do with that question. So we don't know. Sometimes we can but Watkins Pool furniture at one time.
Okay, thanks.
Further questions? Okay, thank you. Okay, we usually start with the appellant. We'll do so today. You likely brought people with you, so you can do your presentation in any order that you want to.
I'll start up here and introduce myself. I'm James Deering with Resource Real Estate Brokerage. I'm located on South Broadway. I'm also the 100% owner of Watkins 7200 LLC, which is sole owner of the parcel that we're discussing right now.
And will your testimony be the truth?
And the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
That's even more than I asked.
That's what I'll provide. I want to thank you for listening to me today. I know a number of you personally. I want to particularly say I appreciate all the work Dan's done on this. He's been more than fair. We've gone over the ordinance. We've discussed what it is, and I expected no other possible
give one of those to Donna?
recommendation from staff
You give one of
other
those to
than
Donna?
the preservation of the same.
Start with her.
So be that as it may, this is what I fully expected when I applied for the demolition permit. And so what I'd like to do is go through the 4-year history and what I have done, and that will take all of 10 minutes through a number of PowerPoint and slides that I'm going to provide, as well as I've produced a handout here which has kind of my narrative and a list of all the things that I have done. So there should,
Give that to Donna down there.
okay, it should be sufficient quantity. Yeah, could you help me with that? My skills as a realtor and developer are a little bit better than my, this, but I have prepared accordingly. Yeah.
Let me know when you start. I'm setting my timer for that 10 minutes.
I rehearsed it in 5. So I've already introduced myself. This is a presentation that I put together. This is some of the history of the building. I did some extensive research with this. You also asked about the historic tax consultant. That was Karen Bodie Baxter. That's what they looked like 100 years ago. That's what they looked like before the highway came through, where it was a budding business district. This is what it looked like in 1990, and this is what it looked like when I purchased the property. It was condemned the year before I purchased the property as a nuisance property. If you all are familiar with Project 87, it was a drug house. There was a mobile meth lab in the back. There was an unattended, open, 24-hour laundromat that homeless people stayed in. This is some of the pictures what it looked like before I cleaned it out. And I took all kinds of vehicles out of there, as well as 40-yard roll-offs of contents only that were part of that, not to mention selling off some of the stuff and scrapping a lot. I formed an LLC to control it. I insured it. I'm sure the building wasn't insured before that. I came up with a renovation budget that I did through Blackline, which is affiliated with Rothschild Allen, who has helped me with the development and that. Income tax credits, soft cost pro forma on it. The rent roll we put together, these are realistic rents beside where I office in the building that I own, that I've done a historic renovation. I also own another dozen buildings in the business district that I have done historic renovations, even with tax credits prior to. So this is realistic. I own about 50 units right now, so these are true market rate rents that I used. Scope of the plans. I work with Tony Duncan, AD Architecture, and Tony's been great. He's been through the building and helped draw up the diagrams. You saw this earlier. Dan put this up. These are on the in the district, and they are contributing. I did the tax credits with Karen's help. It is eligible for state and federal historic tax credits, which I just had to go through the renewal process. I spent a sufficient amount of money on the buildings on the south. It's divided up into three pieces, but one parcel, and I can talk to that when you address those questions of me. It was endorsed by the former alderman. I did the tax abatement on it. It was an off year, so I had to actually go and appeal through the tax commission and bring suit to it, but I do have a 10-year tax abatement attached to it, sustainability impact study. I was going to turn the laundromat and use that. This is what it almost looked like when it was operating. Did a study on that with the demographics and the analysis and the feasibility and the pro forma on that as to what it might look like. Landmarks had endorsed the project and given us some notoriety. And I'll bring attention to my friends here in the back row that are going to speak to the project as well. And I think they know me and they know the project. So thanks for viewing my that part of the process. And go to the next one. I think I'll be able to page through that. Yeah. We'll just take a quick look at that. The narrative updated, that's the handout that I gave you. It's kind of a summary of it. Let me just go to the next document, and then I can page through. These are all just different pieces.
Okay, so you want this or not? So
No, you all have a copy of this.
Yes, that's done.
This was just kind of the explanation
Pro
of it.
forma?
Yeah, to the pro forma. Yeah, so I can page through it.
Scroll down.
Yeah, except it's too big.
It sure is.
This doesn't count on my 10 minutes. Did you stop that stopwatch?
It's clicking along. Our attorney just asked that. You're gonna have to talk a lot faster.
Well, this is staff time.
Yeah, sorry about
We can do it just when it's open. I can just page.
Yeah, that's
I can
fine.
just page through. Can you get it back to where it was?
to this one here.
No, to just 100% or whatever percentage
What do you
it
want,
was.
James?
Bob, we're
No.
taking this off your time.
Yeah, well, I'm doing what I can, guys, sorry.
There you go. I think I can
Just
scroll down.
up and scroll up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Scroll up. Okay. So, we actually did, I'm not sure.
Rabbit.
Huh?
Sorry.
Oh, okay. Two-handed?
Two-finger.
All right. Let me just go back. This was a blended photograph that somebody produced and sent to me that was up top, which I thought was interesting. The old picture in the executive summary. you know, I hit that little bottom thing before, and it really worked, it really worked better. Is this, yeah, okay, I could just hit enter. An aerial, some of the things around it, the endorsement letters I showed you before, the plans. These were my partners in working with the development. Again, the pro forma analysis, an operating statement of what it would do, 5-year cash flow analysis, because I have to hold it with the federal tax credits for that, of how the profitability would be, the rent roll again, and then the historic credits, tax credits, how they factored in, and then the soft cost. This was when the project was $3 to $4 million with that. I used this and I sent this to probably 24 different lenders, and those didn't include anyone that didn't have an appetite for this kind of project. I also presented it to at least 10 other investors with monies and the wherewithal to do that, and none of them took me up on that. I didn't do this.
The progress report?
Progress report you have. Let's go to the appraisal. This is the just the executive summary of what we paid for. This is what you get for $4,500. Is okay, yeah. So they ordered the appraisal, and these are the numbers they came up with. After spending $3 to $4 million on the project, they concluded that it would be worth $1.2 million once it was done and fully occupied. When it was done, but prior to occupancy, $1 million or a little less, and then they said the whole thing was only worth $150,000 as is. I'm done with that slide.
Notice or not?
Yeah, let's do that. So then, just recently, Paul Wood came down on his own initiative, found the building and cited the building for condemnation. I did go ahead and highlight this. This was just done in August. So dealing with the ordinance, which I'm going to address this, that the building or structure has been ordered secure. It was boarded up and not allowed for access back in 2011, I believe, with John McAnulty, the building inspector who did Project 87, who has since moved to Germany. John allowed me access to work on it and clean it out, but it's always been boarded in the front and secured. So it's been in excess of 12 months, and so it can be condemned for occupancy and subsequently demolished, as I understood it. Here's a citation of some of the violations that he found in that particular building. And this refers just to the southernmost building, which I think you've already seen, and the next slide is a picture of that back wall. Go to the next. Okay, so much for my 10 minutes with that. What I would like to do is address the ordinance. Dan gave me the good advice to address these specifically as if we were in a court of law, per se. So what I wanted to say with regards to Section 5, which is your board decision of the demo permit, that you talked about a plan for the area. The Villas never put together a plan, the previous alderman, for that. We have had a lot of planning. Fred Hessel is here from Carondelet Community Development Corporation, who has been with me kind of every step of the way. We have streetscape improvements going on and other kind of development thing, but not any grand plan for that. I'm not going to argue the fact that these are architectural quality, that these are merit structures. That's why I bought the building, to save it and preserve it and to renovate it. I do disagree on the condition of the property. Dan thinks that it will stand for 6 more months. I would ask you all if you were buying a piece of property and you had that assurance that they thought it might stand for 6 more months, would you buy the property like that? I'm not exactly sure. The buildings do form an attached row. They are adjoining but not necessarily connected. You saw the structures in that. That was one of the other points. And yeah, there is a lot of neighborhood potential with that, the surrounding blocks, and there has been some demolition with it. Just recently, 2 buildings fell in the 7,000 block, which one happened to adjoin another one of my properties that I own, which then the demolition contractors tore off part of my wall to, again, preserve it. I've had them rebuild it. I have an application in from LRA to purchase one of the 2 lots that the city owns, and then to redevelop that and secured my building, which I've gotten a new tenant for. So I'm not going to argue that reuse potential, that they've been unoccupied for some portion of time, and they have been showing substantial signs of substantial deterioration. Yeah, they have. Economic hardship, that was not applicable. Again, I don't know about you all or your wherewithal, but now my most recent cost came in for the renovation of the hard cost of that at $6.5 million due to the deterioration. I do have money, and I do have money for renovation, but in order to do this project now and what the lenders would want and the risk that I would have to risk my entire financial portfolio and more. Tell my youngest daughter, who's a sophomore at college, that I'm using her money on this project. Not to mention my wife wouldn't agree with that. You mentioned about new market tax credits. I did originally look at those. As a matter of fact, I'm very good friends with Zach Boyers of U.S. Bank. And Zach had been down to my office, and we looked at the project, and he said, we're looking at a minimum of $5 million to do that. I didn't approach the city at the time, but I did talk to them in terms of all the abatement process and with development here in SLDC, and they weren't possible or available. And at that time, it was not a $5 million project, and I had no intention of spending $5 million to do that. The demolition will eliminate the entire south side of the block, leaving it empty. Okay? This is a 7,200 block. On the east side, a 7,300 block and 7,400 block. Those are already vacant. Those are empty. Union Pacific Railroad owns those 2. When LaBarge ended their lease, they made them tear down the buildings, so those are open. I would chance to say that the railroad would probably be more interested in owning again, because they owned this block of buildings at one point in time, then they'd have 3 contiguous blocks leading up to their vacant, unused 15 acres behind and on the east side of South Broadway. So.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that point.
Okay. The railroad owns the 2 blocks south of it, and contiguous 15 acres beyond that to the east toward the river.
And you, which is floodplain. And you think they'd like more?
I'm thinking that they might like my block of buildings because that allows them another block of frontage on their parcel. They own everything from Nagel to the south, those 3 blocks and what the equivalent of 8 blocks deep, with the one exception of my block.
Okay, I get your point now, thank you.
So I wanted to make mention of, and Jeff's going to introduce his plan to develop the properties. He's planning on demising walls and building a structure in there, but I'm going to let him talk about that. But you talked about maybe taking down a building or 2 and then doing a development plan. I also own the Clark Terry building, 7714 through 18. It's one of the few buildings beside this block that I have not done a renovation yet. I've been working on that for a couple of years. That's a property I did buy from Ben Sims, who had done a lot of work in the area, and I worked with him. And it's been tough to find a developer or a tenant that I would be able to work that in. So developing these individually. I want to address also the one parcel aspect that we talked about. It is one parcel. I don't know when it was put together. I have considered reparceling it, just one more expense and one more trouble of doing the development. Because of that, I actually have 3 historic tax applications. I have the building on the north, I have the building on the south, and then all the buildings in between. Karen said I wouldn't be able to put them all into one because we couldn't document that Watkins Furniture and Fuel at one time owned or influenced or leased or used those 2 end buildings. So with that, I think I've addressed most all of the points. There is one more slide, which is my offer slide. Oh, there you are, right behind me. So here's where I stand right now. So the building is listed for sale. I'm promoting it. Frankly, it's gotten a lot more attention since the demolition permit was filed. I have it out there for sale in the multi-list. You all are welcome to buy it as well. I can still sell it at a loss. I welcome anyone to partner with me in the development. I would sell or finance the entire project if someone wanted to do that. They could use or they could purchase my ownership entity, which includes the tax credits. I also have a developer entity, which that's something also that could be used or purchased. And I'm willing, and I've spoken with all the people with regards to me staying on as a co-developer with a defined agreement. Matt Sissel is not here today. I have signed a co-developer agreement with him, not only for this project, but the other one I mentioned, the White Clark Terry buildings and other things. And I've learned quite a bit from Matt with regards to feasibility. So suffice it to say, Matt's not going to act as co-developer on this project, nor does he want to purchase it. And then I'm, of course, willing to sell this to the development group who has contacted me, who's going to rebuild it. Although I am going to take a loss, it is better than risking the investment of my children's inheritance.
Okay, let's start on this end with questions. Commissioner Richardson?
Sorry, so is there do you have an engineering report?
On the buildings?
Yes.
No.
That's all I got.
Let me just clarify that for you, David. I have had 4 reputable contractors come through the project, and although I haven't ordered or paid for a structural engineering report, they have given me their various bids on what it would take to do the renovations, and in the scope of their work with the breakout in detail, there's quite a bit of money allocated for structural and foundation work. I do want to mention also on that south building, which is the oldest, which is the one that I targeted, which was the smallest cost-wise of the development. I decided to go ahead and put new roofs on it because it was leaking badly. The tree had damaged the corner of the building, and the back had structural problems. So I went ahead and put new roofs on. I had the front tuck pointed historically by one contractor, and I had the back wall rebuilt. It wasn't finished, and well, the whole wall was tuck pointed, but it wasn't sealed up, and the back wall fell out. And that was kind of my last straw of trying to be able to work with the structures as they are. There's a substantial amount of truck traffic on Broadway, also ones that go along Nagel. Robert has been somewhat vacated, but there is an active train track where there's a half dozen or so trains that come by daily, and those trains come within 50 feet of the building.
Mr. Colleen?
No question.
Mr. Vines?
Just a couple. I don't know if this was in the document, but what was the estimated demolition cost to you for this?
I'd need to go ahead and let Jeff speak to that. One of the other things that I did upon Fred's recommendation is contact Joe Schoonover, who's over in Kansas City, who is doing what he calls deconstruction, which is the takedown kind of surgically of the building with the idea of saving and reutilizing the parts. Joe gave me some numbers. I'm just going to ballpark it because I have taken down one other building and assisted other people in doing that, but each structure would probably run 10 to 15,000 for the small ones and probably 20 to 25,000 for the big ones. And that would be offset by the brick content. That would be the demolition cost. So if I had to ballpark it, I'm probably talking about 150 to 200,000 to take it down.
And how long have you owned the building? I think you mentioned it, but I didn't.
Over 4 years.
A little over. And then the condition of the buildings when you purchased them versus today, how would you characterize?
They were in poor condition then, but because I wasn't able to deal with the roof or some of the other major structural work or tuck pointing, they've greatly deteriorated. There's more cracks in it. There's more bulges in the outside walls.
And finally, is there any specific reason why you feel these buildings would not be standing in 6 months from now?
Well, I know the one fell down. The one on the north side, which is also a workable project, has a bulge in it that is out maybe 3 feet. You can see the gap on the inside. And again, they're trains and trucks coming by, kind of rattling the building the whole time. There are pieces that have been falling off of it on the masonry. The north building had a attached porch that fell off of it. It's falling kind of piece by piece. And the difficulty I've had with a lot of the lenders in getting the financing together, which I did want to phase it originally, is a lot of them didn't want to lend on it unless they had financing in place for the entire project, because they didn't want to see me do one building and then have a derelict building next to it, although I have all these other properties on South Broadway and Carondelet Business District that I lease up almost despite the fact that there are problems and gaps in buildings that are deteriorating.
One last one that just came up. I'm sorry to drag this out.
The last one?
Yeah, really the last one. It's yes. Do you have any estimations about what it would cost to just secure the building, just to ensure that it's sealed from the elements enough to maybe sustain it for someone else to come in and take an interest in it?
Okay. I have secured it. It's been boarded up. It's been reboarded. I can't tell you how many times they've broken into it. Typically not from the front. I keep the front appearance boarded and with window dressings or shades and that. I've tarped over roofs before. I've tried to secure it. I've tried to drain off water on things, but a lot of that's just futile attempts until I really put all new roof and roof systems on it. And most all of them need the structural framework on it. It's not a matter of, most of them are flat roof. Actually, the one I did, though, was pitch shingle. But all of those have to be a complete tear-off, and the roof joists and everything need rebuilt, redecked, and all new coverings on it. So, assigning a monetary value, I did get some bids on that, but that in and of itself, just the roof work, I think was $750,000. And I wasn't ready to do that cash out of pocket without knowing that I had financing in place.
Thank you.
Not to mention I didn't have the money to do $750,000 of work.
Chairman Kennedy? Okay,
Thank you.
who's next in your presentation?
Would be Jeff Meese, who is the developer.
I'd like to thank you all for taking time to meet with us tonight.
What is your name?
I'm sorry.
Is your name?
My name is Jeff Meese. It's Geoff.
What is your address?
My address is 915 Victory. I live in South County.
And will your testimony be the truth?
Do what?
Will you tell the truth?
Yes.
Okay, proceed.
To start with, you asked my address. I purchased my house at 915 Victory 23 years ago, and it was built in 1852-ish. It was slated for demolition when I bought it. I completely reconstructed and restored that home over the last 20-something years. I currently have it on the market, listed at $395,000, and it is a beautiful home. It was well preserved, and it's eligible to be put on the historical register. And I'm going to allow the next purchaser to do that if they so please.
Where in the city are you going to move?
I am actually going to move temporarily into Limay. I'm very heavily influenced in that South City area. Me and my business partner have purchased 2 acres of property behind the railroad-owned property, back off of a road called Vulcan, which has been closed and decommissioned for many years. It's the private.
There's a gorgeous property in the 7200 block of South Broadway.
Well, we would like, yeah, we want to buy that property as well. The reason we'd like to buy that property is we know what's going on in that area with the destabilization. There's a lot of prostitution. There's a lot of homeless people living down along that stretch. And that particular block, unfortunately, being dark at night and, you know, accessible if you want to break into it, it is done quite frequently, as James said. We have business people and friends that are in the county and in the city that would like to come up to South City and do business. But they don't want to come into a building that's in bad disrepair or been gently restored, and they don't want to spend $1 million restoring a building that probably should have been torn down or repurposed, because they can go out to West County, or they can go to Jefferson County, or they can go to Afton and pick up a piece of property and build a new building for that point. They'd like to come up this way, and they'd like to do things. We build things. I've got a list of some of my credentials. Those are just my project management experiences. My very first commercial project I ever did was in Westport. I was the general contractor on it, GC in charge, but I was not a general contractor. I was hired by the owners. Did that project under budget, in time frame, and won the Maryland Heights Betterment Award for the year.
What's an extreme home?
Extreme home, you ever seen the TV show on ABC where they tear down a home and build a new home in 3 days, 3 to 5 days?
I usually don't watch TV shows.
No
about
problem.
demolition.
It's a ABC program's been going on for years, and I was asked to provide experience, products, and expertise to come up and help them achieve their first insulated concrete form home construction. And I did do that. I went to Vermont, volunteered, and went up there, and in 3 days we tore down a house and completely built a 3,500 square foot home and finished yard, everything in 3 days. I didn't get much sleep.
Remember the episode number?
Do what?
The episode number?
I don't, but I could get it for you. If you look under ABC's Extreme Home Makeover, it's Vermont, and it'll come up there. It's a ICF home, insulated concrete form. The child had some kind of rare disease and had breathing machines, and everything had to be in the basement. My partners and myself, Kevin, I sent you a financial list there. He said, feel free to call and check his bank references. He has over $1.5 million in real estate that is completely owned outright with no loans against it or anything encumbrances against it. He has bank accounts in multiple banks that are in excess of what most people carry in their savings. And he also has a steel pipe revenue of excess of his own product at $350,000 that's sitting there ready to be liquidated and used or borrowed against as needed.
So your testimony here is that there is no financial hardship.
I'm sorry?
Your testimony is that there is no financial hardship.
On our side, there is no financial hardship, no. And I know that there's been a lot of talk about the tax credits and things of that nature, and we don't want them. We don't need them. We'd rather just build the buildings, get it done, and move forward. If there's the 10-year tax allotment for the real estate tax that would be available, it would definitely help make it easier to attract people into the businesses and get them built faster, but it is not a requirement.
Do you have any specific testimony in support of the demolition?
Yes, I do.
Okay, let's
So I have gone through that property. I have a lot of experience with dealing with different types of construction. Some things that come to mind that really jump out at me are the basements of the building. The basements are all stone. They're all heavily, heavily deteriorated. They're shallow basements. They're about average 6, 7 feet deep at best. Some of them shallower. They also reside within inches, if not in, the 1995 floodplain. So to restore them and try to bring them back up to a standard that potentially could be flooded and then taken back out would take the bank financing portion back into an issue. James mentioned that there's a railroad track 50 feet behind the building, and it does carry quite a bit of cars and traffic every day. That traffic that goes through there is constantly vibrating those buildings and causing issues. I have a client down the road who's actually demolishing one of his old buildings to build back a new steel one right now at the corner of Steins. And they're taking down the back end and they're going to build a new steel building and keeping the historic front, which is great. But the back of the building has literally been falling down for years. He goes in there on a regular basis and just sweeps up the brick and sweeps up the debris that the trains caused to fall down. These buildings were built a long time ago. They're all soft brick. There is some hard brick on the faces, but the main construction brick inside is all the old soft brick. And with the lack of utilities for years, the lack of maintenance on the roofs, even prior to James owning it, obviously, he put money into the roofs to secure them, has caused these buildings to heavily deteriorate. Every floor of every building in that place is bowed from up in the inside. So all the load-bearing posts, which are typically wood, and some of them are steel, have been replaced with steel over the years, are holding up the floors where the weight isn't, but the stone foundations on the sides are collapsing. It was asked of us, could we save the front of the building and just build new backs on them? And the answer to that would be no, because we would really have to still destruct the whole front building or deconstruct the whole building and then reconstruct it again anyway. If we're doing that, I would like to preserve the brick and some of the architectural features so we could reutilize them and keep the historic look and flair of the area, because we all like that. But to actually try to put the buildings back in their exact form is not realistic, and it's very cost prohibitive, as James said. Our plan would be not to have basements. Therefore, we take the floodplain completely out. We know we have to do shoring, we have to put in piers, and we're prepared to do that. We would like to take all the utilities, get them out of the road. Right now, the Clee Gas is out there tearing up the road for the gas lines, replacing all of them. And in the past few weeks, I drive by there every day. There's a big crack on the front of the south wall building, and it's opening by the day. And I don't know if it's from them jackhammering in the street or from the trains going by or just a combination of the two. That's also the building that the back wall has already fallen out of. The wall on the north end building on the face, as James mentioned, is sticking out over 3 feet. It's bad, and it's not getting any better. Unfortunately, that's the building that has the most detailed brick. So if it's going to be preserved and try to be used, it needs to be deconstructed as soon as possible so that those elements can be saved. Because by the time they hit the street and just shatter, there's not going to be anything to be picked up and realized. It's got to be planned out. We have several customers that we've been talking to already that would be clients and tenants in those buildings. One of which is a client of mine already, not a tenant. Built a commercial kitchen for the health food trucks, for the food trucks and caterers down in Fenton, Missouri. And he's having an outstanding response to it because city and county ordinances have said all these trucks now have to have certified kitchens to work out of. So he wants us to build one of these units especially for him and have a commercial kitchen with access so the food trucks could come in and out and get
Which one?
anywhere in the block. He doesn't care. Build him something that would fit his needs and fit his clients' needs. So out of all those buildings there, when I build new buildings back, he would want them to be a commercial kitchen that's a rent-by-hour kitchen by different caterers and different food trucks. Willing to work with the city for zoning to make sure the access is good. I would say we'd probably bring it in either the Nagel end and have it near the end, or one building in, or the other at the south end of that road is decommissioned. It doesn't go anywhere. Our plan is to put all the utilities in the back of the buildings and do a plot. And I think a difference of what we talk about it a little shorter time frames. If we deconstruct the buildings, secure all the good materials out, clean up the site, set our piers and our foundations, and reestablish a safe sidewalk for people to walk on, then we would also be at the same time reestablishing all the utilities back on the back of the property. So when we added each suite or each new building back, we would actually have all the utilities there and not be ripping the streets and ripping the sidewalks back open.
Have you talked to lots of prospective tenants?
Actually, we've only been working with this project for a couple months, but yes, I've already talked to 12 potential clients or tenants, and I've got very good response.
So why are you here today rather than, say, in 3 months after you've gotten 8 people who want to be there?
Because today, this building's on the headlines to be either torn down or saved, and currently, I don't see why preserving it other than.
It's only before us because you applied for a demo permit.
Well, it was also before you because of the fact that it was condemned again, recondemned again.
I applied for the demolition permit. And then also in the development plan, I had signed letters of intent on all of my commercial space during the development phase and plan, different businesses that would go in. And also because I have other commercial properties in the area, I'd be working with him in helping leasing up all of the spaces, which I currently have a dozen anyway that I have already occupied or available that I'm doing lease ups. So I don't anticipate a problem between his leads, the development plan, and what we're doing in terms of being able to lease up the space.
Instead of building apartments on top that could potentially turn into HUD housing or something like that in the future, our goal is to try to put in some Airbnbs, which are very popular. They're being utilized all over the world. And I don't know if you're familiar with them. It's kind of like the Uber of bed and breakfast. Allows people to be pre-certified, sign in and out and check in and out of their rooms, and we take care of the housekeeping and maintenance on the facilities. There is no hotel there. There used to be a hotel, and there used to be a bunch of by-the-night rooms down in this area because it was a big train depot for the city and the county back in the early 1900s. But there's nothing there now. So the bars and the nightlife and that are down in that area have nowhere to bring in people from out of town. They have nowhere to bring in entertainers and have them stay locally. They all have to go to the city or to the county to spend their money on for lodging and stay. And so one of our ideas was to keep the higher buildings without having to get into a bunch of elevators and additional costs there, would to do some of the Airbnbs above some of the office spaces. And that would be planned out in advance per space. But we'd like to try to have an anchor tenant to go into the commercial space. So we build to suit a square footage that fits their needs. You know, I can go in a strip mall and buy a piece of property, or in the county and buy a piece of property and build a strip mall all day long. They love it.
Commissioners on this side, have we got a clear idea on what the proposed subsequent use is?
No, I don't. No, sorry.
Commissioners on this side, do we have
I
a
do
clear
not.
idea yet on what the proposed subsequent use is?
Chairman, I don't. So do you have a binding contract to purchase the property?
We have a contract as a gentleman's agreement to purchase the property and willing to sign it within 30 seconds of you guys giving us a demolition or deconstruction permit. And we'll sign it beforehand, a binding contract. We got cash in hand to buy it. We're ready to buy it right now.
But that contract is contingent upon,
A deconstruction permit for the block.
thank you.
I'm not exactly clear either exactly what the plan is. I hear a lot of theoretical potential developments, Airbnb, a food truck kitchen, whatever else you mentioned, and it just seems very kind of intangible. There's nothing solid, and here we are dealing with a very, very distinctive and important historic building. And then you're asking, you know, for permission to demolition. Right. Okay. So, my question is this: what guarantees are there that what happens if none of these potential tenants pan out, and you're left with a parcel with no building on it, and there's just not demand in the area to build new construction, and you've already cited prostitution and drug deals and all kinds of reputable activities happening there, which is true. We're aware of that. What happens if there is no demand for tenants to be in your new building?
Well, there is demand. There's demand for new construction. There's not demand for old derelict buildings that are not up to par, not financeable, you can't get lending on them. People build business plans for example, my client with the commercial kitchen, he's not going to be able to put a $100,000 kitchen into one of these buildings as it stands today, because there's not a bank out there that's going to support his business plan. Now, he can go in a strip mall in the county, and he can do it. but he can't do it down here in this neighborhood. He's asked, he's looked. But he'd like to be down in South City with his next one. His other one is down in Fenton, and it's doing wonderful. Just finished that build out the end of April, and he's sold out. He's 7 by 24, 365-day kitchen, and he's sold out. He's blocked all his time. So he's ready to move into a new one.
Is there anything else you wanted to add?
I'd just really like to add, there was an article, and I kind of wrote some highlights to that article that was put out the other day in Next STL. And I know it drew a lot of comments. So I put in bold underneath it some of my bullet points of what I know about the city area down there and about the article.
Turns out you can raise that with them.
Oh, I shared it with you for you. It's not a rebuttal. I actually agree with a lot of what they had to say.
I think they're smiling behind you.
Yeah. There's what behind me?
Smiling behind you.
Okay. I just think that it would be a great opportunity to redevelop that area, and I'd like to have the opportunity to try it. And I know we will get it done. I know we'll pull it off. We will be developing another building, and we'll be applying for building permits probably in the next 30 days for the property that we purchased behind it. So.
Hearing anything else?
Yes.
I had one question. It's an exciting idea, but can it be done? Is it possible there's a piece of property where you don't have to tear down historic buildings to do it?
Well, I've tried to buy and or lease the railroad property, and they said no. They'd rather let it sit vacant until the place freezes over. And the land behind the tracks is floodplain, except for the parcel that I own. So.
Anything else? No. Okay. I see a galaxy of testimony ahead. Ruth, Nini, Andrew, Jeff, arrange yourselves the way you want to do it, and let's start hearing from you.
Very quick.
Okay, come first.
I just wanted, Ruth Kenoy, 5229 Oletha Avenue. I swear to tell the truth. I'm a South City resident, and I work in historic preservation. And I am here just to say that I support the Cultural Resources Office, their recommendation that you deny demolition. The property owner got this 4 years ago. It's been a district for at least 10 years. He knew that it was in a district. He knew it was in a preservation zoned area. When we have a project that goes bad, we don't just tear down the buildings because we want to do something else. And in terms of the developer, we have a lot of vacant lots here in St. Louis. Not all of them are on railroad tracks and other parts of the city, and I'm sure he could find a great place to do his project and see if that takes off. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
So there was some testimony that it has 3 historic approvals or 3 different applications. Isn't that possibly a positive thing for this development? Because then you could do one building or one group of buildings and get multiple.
In fact, I was thinking about areas like Hyde Park, where it's very much a distressed neighborhood, but piece by piece, developers come in, they do a little bit at a time, and the neighborhood is really starting finally to look very good and take off and be much safer in those.
And you could get your financing individually, and you get your part 3s,
Absolutely. We don't have
your
to
state
do
historic
this
tax credits.
all at one
Okay.
time, and I think it would be a devastating thing to just knock down the entire block in an area like this.
Thank
It
you.
would be a disservice.
Ms. Harris?
Hello.
You are?
My name is Nini Harris. I live
Live at?
5521 Alaska Avenue.
And you will?
Tell the truth.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. I'm here to ask that you not allow this block of buildings to be torn down. There are plenty of vacant lots. This block is the only intact block of buildings on the east side of Broadway. That part of Broadway was developed as a commercial district beginning in the 1850s, as you can see, well, there on those buildings, those corner buildings that were probably there at the time of the Civil War. In this series of buildings, we have not just Civil War era buildings, we have a frame clapboard covered building, a small two-story building that probably predates the brick buildings. There are buildings with molded brickwork and with terracotta trim, and there are a series of cast iron storefronts. At least 3 different companies produced those cast iron storefronts with all their variations. This is a significant block, and it is critical to the redevelopment of the east side of Broadway and restoring this area to a commercial district, again, thriving and bringing energy to the neighborhood. So I thank you so much for your interest.
I'm sorry, I have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I'm,
Everyone should assume that Commissioner Richardson has a question and simply stay until he asks it.
I'm sorry. So you're an architectural historian, correct?
Yes.
With extensive experience on architecture in Carondelet?
Yes.
And so these 7 or 8 buildings, would you rate them high merit or merit, all of them?
All of them. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, yes.
Right.
Definitely.
And to lose any of them, would that, as our CRO said, do you believe that would have a catastrophic effect on the urban design in the historic district?
Well, to lose the block would have a catastrophic effect. To lose any one of these would take away from the integrity of the block. It's the block as a whole just shows a whole evolution from the Civil War era up through the turn of the century. And, you know, until, too, we can get in and really look at that frame building and get a look at that, that could be the oldest. It's a fascinating block. It's hard to get views of because you have to walk along the railroad tracks to get good looks at it. But it's an amazing block, and I would hate to lose any part of it.
Thank you.
Andrew Weil?
Hello, I'm Andrew Weil. I'm here representing Landmarks Association of St. Louis at 911 Washington Avenue. If you need my home address, I'm willing to provide that as well. But I will tell the truth in my testimony. I know Mr. Deering, known him for several years. I was really, I think, as excited about this plan as he was in the early days, and you know, I was as supportive as we could be at that time, and you know, I regret the fact that I have to stand here in opposition at this phase. But that's what I'm here to do, and I'm sure, James, you're not surprised by that. We're not here to solve the problem of these buildings. We're here to look at the ordinance and what the ordinance says per this application. And I think the Cultural Resources Office has done a really admirable job in interpreting it. And I agree with their interpretation that these, this permit, it should be these permits, but this permit should not be granted. I would ask you to imagine briefly if I've seen some discrepancies in the numbers here, somewhere between 7 and 9 of these buildings. If they hadn't this quirk of parcel, you know, combination, we would arguably be here looking at 7 to 9 different demolition applications of historic buildings within the core of the Central Carondelet Historic District. So I can imagine the individual treatment of these, and each one of them would have the same people here, and I think the same analysis. Just keep that in mind. This is an unusual case, and I agree with the characterization of it as potentially catastrophic. There are so many questions I have about this, but I'd like to start with disputing the claim that Mr. Deering made that the villas did not have a plan for this area. They most certainly did, and they pursued that through the creation of 5 subsequent National Register historic districts, one after another. Central Carondelet, boundary increases 1 through 4. And I was the author of 3 of those. Landmarks Association as an organization was the author of all of those. And that was a process that spanned many years, was very well planned in an effort to attract redevelopment dollars, and also to protect against the arbitrary demolition of the architectural heritage of Carondelet, which the aldermen viewed as a cultural asset and a potential economic asset. So I think the fact that, and he spent, I would say, over $100,000 of community development block grant money, ward funds in pursuing this plan, pursuing this vision of historic districts, of historic revitalization and protection from demolition such as this. So he regarded it as a public good. He put a plan in place to keep these areas intact and see them realize their full potential using the quality of the historic buildings that are there. I regret and I acknowledge that these buildings are not in great condition. Again, we're not here to plan their future. We're here to protect them per the terms of the ordinance so that potentially a future can come about. And the future that we're hearing about tonight is it's not a plan. It's a collection of ideas, but we're not here reviewing an actual plan. And I would ask, if we're going to be bringing in all this information about what's going in here in the future, then we should be doing that at a time when that plan is really in place and we say, okay, they are going to build this new row of historic replica buildings. They're going to make a major investment in this area. It is actually going to be, an improvement to the area. Then we could make an informed decision about whether or not sacrificing these buildings for that subsequent development makes sense. At this point, we're really not talking about that, even though there's been a lot of time expended on talking about that. We're talking about demolishing these buildings for a hypothetical new use that is totally non-binding, and also this is a National Register historic district. This is not a local historic district, so there's no design guidelines. This is the last time it's going to come before you or the Cultural Resources Office in terms of new construction. So they've put together a very nice faux historic replica of a block, but it could be anything. It could be absolutely anything because there are no design guidelines in this area and it's all just subject to zoning. So I would ask that you keep that in mind. I think they should, they should be coming back for these permits when a real plan is in place. And at that time, look at it, on face value. But right now, we're not there. They talk a lot about the difficulty of finding tenants for these areas. I contend that that's only going to get worse, the extent to which we keep losing buildings in this area. These are economic assets and they disappear. The types of redevelopment interest and investment that we're seeing in St. Louis City they begin with revitalization of historic buildings and then there's follow-on development of new construction. We're not seeing that in reverse. And considering that we have such abundant vacant land in this area, to me, is a very good indicator. You've got literally 500 feet of vacant frontage, the block north of this, and then a vacant lot immediately next to it, and then a surface parking lot taking up the vast majority of the block across the street. If there was a market for real redevelopment of vacant space down here, you'd see something. This would just be a totally anomalous and frankly very surprising if a large-scale new development moved in on this newly created vacant block that combined both vibrant tenants and quality architecture. That would really be a unique situation, and a situation I would applaud. I just question whether or not it's realistic at this time. The vision for Carondelet that Alderman Villa had in his mind when he created all of these historic districts was one that I think mirrors what we're seeing in revitalizing areas all around the city. And you think about the Grove, or you think about the South Grand Business District, or Cherokee Street, or Morganford, or even Salisbury Street. These areas are attracting a lot of investment in residential architecture, in part because they're adjacent to commercial districts where people can have that city living experience and live close to where they play and where they work. And Carondelet, aside from Virginia and Michigan Avenue to a certain extent, and the Ivory Triangle, this is the historic business district of Carondelet. And if this disappears, I really think that damages the potential of a lot of the surrounding residential districts to really thrive the way so many other city neighborhoods can, because they have that mix of residential and commercial together. Finally, there's a point that I think should be raised, and that was brought about by the statements about this being in a floodplain. As far as I know, new construction in a floodplain requires a permit from the Army Corps. I believe it's a 404 permit. We don't know that that would be granted in this case, and that's an obstacle that no one's addressed. And I think it's worth noting, if you're considering granting this based on having been convinced that there is new development coming, I think it would be due diligence to resolve that question before just granting a blank check to proceed with this project as stated. That is my breathless testimony.
Questions on the left? Questions on the right?
So you did some of the National Register work.
I did.
In the Carondelet. And so and you're familiar with these buildings then?
Yes.
So how would you rate all these buildings as high merit or merit?
Yeah, I would. And I would also give them precedence because it is an anchor block. I mean, it's an entire block face in the core of the South Broadway Business District. This isn't a merit building here or a merit building there. This is a whole block. And I think that the commercial architecture along Broadway is actually sort of disproportionately valuable for the neighborhood, as opposed to, you know, an individual sort of scattered house in the middle of a neighborhood.
Okay, and then with respect to, I know you talked about both Alderman Villas and their plans, but are you aware of any actual redevelopment plans that were passed, either a Chapter 99 plan, a Chapter 100 plan, a Chapter 353 plan, a TIF plan, that said these should be demolished?
No, there is none that I'm aware of, neither passed by them or the current alderman. But I do strongly think that the years that Alderman Villa pursued putting these historic districts in place and the amount of public money that he invested in that for the good of his ward constitutes a pretty strong form of a kind of plan, and that kind of plan did not envision the arbitrary demolition of these buildings. It envisioned them being rehabilitated and revitalized.
Thank you.
Is your testimony distinguishing between the two Alderman Villas?
No. I was
One perhaps a preservationist and the other not?
Well, when I said the Villas, I was echoing the statement of Mr. Deering. I was working specifically with Tom Villa. Thank you.
Jeff Fines.
You know, Amber said most of my points.
Perfect. Brian Coldy. What? Nothing to say? No.
Right. Brian Coldy, I swear to tell the truth.
Your address. We can find you.
3528 Victor Street.
Thank you.
Okay. I just want to point out, I do work for the city. I took vacation time to come here and speak to you all today. I used to work in this neighborhood for almost 10 years, so I'm very familiar with it, and I still feel very attached to it. So this has me very concerned. As has been pointed out, this is the most intact commercial block on this side of Broadway. It would be devastating to lose this. The variety of architectural styles, you really have to go and look at these buildings to see it. There's detailing, every building is different. There's all kinds of different brickwork, ornamental, pressed brick. There's stone sills, stained glass transoms, which are incredibly extensive on this particular block. Scroll work, incise scroll work in the wood above the arched windows. There's some ghost signs that are still intact on some of the side walls. And some of these are details that could not be replicated in a replica building. There was no way you could recreate the character that exists in this block, no matter what amount of money you spent on a replica. So, personally, based on my view of the city and all different neighborhoods that I've been exposed to, this block seems as rehabable as any that I've seen in other areas. I've seen far worse in terms of condition of buildings prior to a renovation. There are many examples in Old North St. Louis, Lafayette Square, Soulard, even recently Tower Grove East, and in Carondelet, of buildings that maybe had 3 walls standing, 2 walls standing, and projects were able to be put together. Took time, but it was done. And in this case, there's 1 wall that the picture shows a collapse, but that affects 1 building, and it's 1 part of 1 wall of 1 building. That could be jacked up temporarily to secure it, not secure just from people getting in, but structurally mothball the building for a possible future developer. So basically what I'm asking for is that this demolition not be approved. I think this project just needs more time. I appreciate Mr. Deering's efforts. Obviously a lot went into it already. I think this needs more time, perhaps a different developer. And many buildings take a long time. I live near the Pelican building, which has been floundering for years, and it is finally being done. And a lot of people gave up on that. So I would request that you give all of this consideration. I thank you. Any questions before I leave? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Siebert?
I won't prolong this anymore.
Okay.
I'll just be repeating things that I said.
Mr. Dean?
Same here.
Okay. Commissioners, this concludes the testimony. Staff, anything to add?
Nope.
To add.
I just want to quickly point out that I did the rezoning. I changed it from J to F to upgrade to do the renovation work. But the majority of the properties, all east of Broadway, are industrial and zoned J industrial or K non-restricted. Unbelievably, it is not in a floodplain. Does not require flood insurance. And I don't know, Nini left the frame building, which may predate the pre-Civil War construction. These were built after the Civil War, but the frame building was a infill building that was built in the 30s, which is probably in the worst shape of the main section of the building. And I don't contest the fact that the 3 applications were actually better and possible to do because that made it doable, with the exception that the lenders wouldn't approve anything but the whole project. And I did actually fulfill the minimum requirement of the work done in order just to renew the tax credits after 3 years for the south building, which is the one that you see, which is the one that's collapsing.
Does any of that final testimony raise questions that commissioners want to ask? Hearing none. Commissioner Richardson, have you got a motion?
I move that the Preservation Board uphold the director's denial of the proposed demolition of the buildings that are high merit or merit, all of them being high merit or merit, on the fact that it fails to meet the criteria of Ordinance 64832, specifically A, B, C, D, E, F, and H.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Commissioner Richardson, discussion?
I think we've thoroughly discussed it, but again, the evidence does not support allowing demolition of any of the buildings at this time.
Anybody else on this side have discussion? Anybody on this side have discussion? Commissioners, there's a motion on the floor that's been made and seconded. The motion is to uphold the director's denial for a variety of reasons. I will call a roll. Commissioner Vines, do you vote yes or no?
I vote yes to uphold the denial.
Chairman Kennedy, do you vote
Yes.
yes or no? Thank you, sir. Commissioner Colleen, do you vote yes or no?
Yes.
Commissioner Richardson, do you vote yes or no?
Yes.
Commissioner Robinson, do you vote yes or no?
Yes.
That is 5 yeses, a quorum is present. The director's denial is upheld. Commissioners, we have before us also a special agenda item, a recommendation to SHPO on the nomination to the National Register of Historic Places of the Pruitt School. The preparer is present. Do we have any questions for her? No. Okay, Commissioner Richardson, have you got a motion?
I move that the board direct staff to prepare a report to the SHPO's office that the property meets the requirements of National Register Criterion C for architecture.
Second. Motion's made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
Sorry?
Criteria A and C. Yeah, I know, that's incorrect.
Oh.
I did a lot of work on that, I had to rewrite it, so I just want to say A.
Could I amend?
Second, staff, what do you think?
Yes, absolutely. Staff's fault. Should have had A and C.
A typo.
So a typo, criterion A for history and C for architecture.
Accept the amendment.
Yes.
Okay. So the motion maker and the seconder approve that change. But to be clear, we'll call a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Ruth, thank you. Good catch. Commissioners, is there any further business? Hearing none, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay. Hearing no objection, we stand adjourned.
Richards.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
You.